Oh, yeah. Welcome in, everybody, to the Cream of the Crop, a fantasy hockey podcast presented by Apples and Ginos, the number one fruit-based fantasy hockey podcast out there, the only fruit-based fantasy hockey podcast out there, and we feel good about that. All right, that's a feather in our cap over here. I'm your host, Blake Creamer. Give me a follow over on X / Twitter at Blake Creamer AG. Also, check out the Apples and Ginos Discord. Link is in the description. Check us out on YouTube. We're doing stuff over there. We got a guy. He's actually creating short form content for us. And then this is amazing stuff. All right. So even more Apples and Ginos content straight to your domes. All right. So we appreciate that. We're also over on Instagram. You know what to do. All right. But that's not why you're here. Today, I'm going to be reviewing the Apples and Ginos sleeper list that we presented in October. And I'll put the link in the description of this podcast here if you want to listen to that again. And I brought a very special guest on the pod here today to help me do that. He's a co-host of the Zoopcast podcast and the creator of LB Hockey, Louis Boulet. Buddy, that is, first off, that's such a cool sounding name, Louis Boulet. It sounds like a superhero. I mean, you must have been really popular in school, were you?
I don't know the name. Well, so I grew up Francophone, as some could tell by the name, obviously. So it's a pretty run of the mill Francophone name growing up here in Ottawa in the school board. So I wouldn't go that far, but it's right. I can't really complain. It's not bad.
Well, if you grew up out west here, buddy, you'd be a legend. I mean, more of a legend than you already are, right? So, yeah, we appreciate that. Louis, thanks so much for joining me here. Part of the reason I wanted to have you on the pod is to sort of get some eyes on some of the great work you're doing over there at your website, which is lb-hockey.com. Is that right?
Yeah,
I think I got it.
Exactly.
Yeah, sweet. Yeah. So, well, first off, why don't you tell our listeners, Louis, about what it is you do here in this hockey space and sort of how you got into it?
Yeah. So I've always been a really big hockey fan and a huge stats nerd, really, growing up. I've always been a big math and numbers guy. Like there's actually, I think it goes all the way back. There's even a video on like my old family computer from when I was maybe 4 years old or whatever. And my mom is filming my sister who had just gotten a new present or whatever. And you can hear in the background, my dad and I sitting at the kitchen table. He's like, okay, Louis, Ray Emery's GAA this season was 2.85. And then you could see me writing it down in like my little
hockey
superstars notebook. But yeah, so I've always been a big hockey guy. I've played my entire life growing up. I still do a few times a week throughout the entire year. I've always loved the sport, and it just felt natural to kind of bring my aptitude for numbers and my love of hockey together. And that's kind of just what I ended up deciding to get into. Went to a university here in Ottawa, University of Ottawa, for statistics and data science. And then as that was going along and I was getting more work done for the government one summer, I realized, I could kind of start using this specifically on the hockey side. I did start in fantasy hockey. Like I'd always have my own in some of my dad's friends' fantasy pools. I, would create my own cheat sheets or like objective rankings and all of that. And I just figured I've always wanted to build something a little bigger that really merges some of the microstats and the new developments on that really match the eye test with a nice clean visual. So I was like, you know what? I feel like that's a bit of a hole that we could fill in the public sphere. So I just got to work, and it's now where it is today, where we've got around a dozen tools and still growing there. It's a lot of, like I tell everyone, working on this stuff doesn't feel like work. And that's just, I think, the best compliment I can give to it for sure.
Buddy, I'm so happy that there are people like you that do this type of stuff because, yeah, I love microstats, as a lot of our listeners know, as Corey Schneider's All Three Zones work, but we also like Natural Stat Trick. You also use Money Puck for information. And there's another site too, I just noticed on your, but I don't remember what it's called. What's that other site that you use for data on your site?
Just recently, actually, I'm now using the Stanley Cap for contract data. Yeah. I'm going to plug that because I literally reached out to David, who owns this. He used to work for the Calgary Flames, I believe. And I reached out to him like earlier this week. I was saying, hey, I'm developing a new contract projector and I'm looking to start using that site for contract data. And it's a great website. I'd highly recommend it in a post-cap friendly world. It's probably it's definitely my go-to, just with the clean visuals and everything they have over there. So a little plug for that. And as you mentioned, Corey does insane levels of work. Like what he does is absolutely invaluable. We don't have that anywhere else. And without what he does and the hours upon hours of manual tracking he does every season, none of what I do or like not even close to the level of depth I provide on my dashboards would even be possible.
Yeah, it's kind of neat, like you said, the amount of work that he does, like, and sort of the branches out from that, like even at my level, which is very surface. It's like I focus a lot on his information. I use that to talk to our listeners and stuff about fantasy hockey. So it's really good stuff, and the stuff you're doing is excellent. All right, amazing visualizations using all three zones, NST, all that stuff. Beautiful to look at and to understand. All right, how are you liking this ad read right here, Louis? Does this sound good? A good promotion for LB Hockey?
Yeah, it's great. Listen, anytime I get to plug the website, it's what I'm working on full time right now. So hey, I'll take the promotion for it.
You bet, buddy. You're crushing it. All right. And for those of you interested on YouTube, we're going to be looking at some of Louis' tools here. Just while we're talking about these players. And again, the purpose for this podcast is to review the 10 sleepers, but I'm really privileged to have Louis here. So, buddy, I appreciate you. Thanks very much. But we got a lot to do. We got 10 players to go through. So let's get the biz on that. Like I said, we're looking at the 10 sleepers Nate and I brought to the table this past October. And just to see what the verdict is. Were these guys, true sleepers who hit for fantasy? Or were they wet noodles that fell off the fork? All right, when you were trying to take a bite. Okay, we got to figure it out. But we're going to talk about what they did and what we can expect next season. Let's do it. All right. And for those of you on YouTube, we're getting into some of the tools here now. Louis' tools. All right. Louis' tools. That sounds, I don't know. We'll workshop that later. All right. First one we got to talk about, Jake DeBrusk. Yeah. This was an interesting one. So the way I'm sort of going to do this is just talk about maybe what my thought process was, or our thought process. And then I want to throw it to Louis for some analysis here. So Jake DeBrusk, first off, his ADP was 146, which, you'll notice all the sleepers that we brought to the table. These were guys that you could get at insane value. So DeBrusk was in that realm there. For me personally, this is just a guy that was getting buried with the Bruins, but always had decent underlying metrics. And I thought there was going to be a good chance that he'd see a lot of time on the top power play, plus top six in Vancouver here. Canucks also signed him to term. They signed him for a 7-year deal. So I think, that says a lot, right? They invested in him. I think a bigger role was there for him. And I projected him for 64 points. All right. And which really hurts to see now. All right. Because that didn't really happen. But, I just thought too, Canucks were a team on the rise, and they didn't lose many pieces from the team that took the Oilers to Game 7 in the second round. So, yeah, I just thought DeBrusk was going to be really good. What were your thoughts, Louis, on DeBrusk going into the season? Did you think he had a chance to kind of, maybe improve on his previous numbers?
Yeah, I think you were definitely in the right on projecting him to get a bit of a breakout, and he was a little bit of a casualty of Vancouver's fall this season. And I'm just gonna preface by saying that, I also do some fantasy, and the main league that I'm in, and if I'm ever referencing fantasy on my own side, it's a keeper league that's points with a little bit of bangers peripherals put into it, and we're like 12-ish people. So at the start, actually, DeBrusk was a guy I early picked as a free agent in week 1 or 2, because I think he got a few goals early on. I didn't have him for very long, but I definitely had him on my watch list for a little bit. And for those watching on the stream and can see the tool up right now. So this is Jake DeBrusk's development matrix, looking at essentially how frequently he uses certain skills versus his success rate with them, to try to identify where his toolkit is at, where he could stand to improve, both by leveraging skills, stopping to use them, or improving some that he's using very often. And as we can see, he's got a very efficient toolkit in the sense that what he doesn't do as well is he doesn't usually do that often, and the vice versa as well. So what he does very often, he's usually fairly good. The one thing that stands out for me, and maybe I'd have to look back to see what it was like before the season, is that his ability to finish at range is a bit of an outlier. That is something that could really stand to improve, given how much of a shooter he tries to put himself as. And I do wonder if that changes once the Canucks kind of figure out that identity offensively. But if he can get to a point where he can leverage how consistent he is in tight, that could be really interesting to me. And I really do wonder, going back, I do think he was a great choice for a potential breakout. He was an excellent transition creator on Boston, and maybe looking at team styles, we could have projected a bit of a drop, because Vancouver has been near bottom of the league on that front for years and creating off the rush. And I wonder if kind of using DeBrusk's ability on the breakout and promoting that can help kind of kickstart that a little bit. So yeah, something on that side where he kind of gets to integrate himself in Vancouver's passing routes a little more, especially starting at the defensive side and getting himself in tight in the offensive zone could potentially get him to bounce back for next year.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important, and yeah, it's nice to hear you say that. Both Nate and I, Nate's the partner I work with here on the podcast. Yeah, we had him for a significant upgrade. We thought there was going to be some more opportunity there, but yeah, like you said, the Canucks, they were just mired in a no offensive zone, right? They just really had a hard time creating anything, certainly off the rush. Like, it was terrible. One of the things, so we'll just talk about what Jake DeBrusk actually did. Like I said, I projected him for 64. He got 48 points, including a career high 28 goals. So that's nice, right? That's kind of a dub, right? But, and he also had a good performance on the power play, which is something that we did predict. But the problem was, like, his play at 5-on-5, that was terrible, right? He had the lowest shots on goal per 60, lowest individual scoring chances for per 60 of his career, right? Which is kind of a surprise. But then when you look at, like you said, what the Canucks were able to do, pretty bad. So I didn't see the shots falling off like that. Also, the vibes were so bad here in Vancouver, man. It was really rough. Like, I look at pretty much everybody on the team who wasn't named Pius Suter or like Connor Garland and be like, and Quinn Hughes be like, yeah, that wasn't your best work, my man. So I do think there's a good opportunity for DeBrusk to bounce back here. But I do think he performed fairly well considering what was going on there in Vancouver. So I don't know. The verdict for a sleeper, I think it's a low-key L. All right, it's a loss. We're not going to take a victory lap there. He did have pockets of value, but he didn't exactly hit after a bit of buzz in draft season. What do you think points projection for next season? Put you on the spot. What do you think he's capable of doing?
I'm thinking he's got to go back up a little bit once he finds a way to kind of get his spot in Vancouver's passing systems a little bit more, because he really dropped on the flow side of things in terms of really getting a lot of passes through him. And I think that's something that comes with time, because it was definitely a strength of his in Boston. So even if it's not next year, I think maybe the year after, because obviously we know he's in for the long run. I'd say probably he had 48 last year. I'd say he probably reaches 55 next season. Maybe a 25 goal season could be there with some nice power play production. I still think he's a great player, and especially given last year, he's definitely a guy that you should look to, depending on the size of the league, either pick up late in the draft or keep your eye on him if he starts off a little hot.
Yep, absolutely could be a value last pick, things like that based on the narrative there in Vancouver. All right. Well, that's Jake DeBrusk. He tooted in our face, and we don't like that, but that's fine. Let's move on. We got to talk about Adam Fantilli. It's Fanta season. So this is an interesting pick. His ADP was 170. So that was like, this is a no-brainer to me. This is a player that we like here at Apples and Ginos. But yeah, I mean, with Columbus, obviously, after the tragic passing of Johnny Gaudreau there, the rest of the team was going to be required to shoulder more of the offensive load. So the thought was for us that Fantilli would be a big part of that. And to me, this is a player in 23-24 that he kind of showed that he can drive his own line, right? He had a really high IPP, 80% IPP at 5-on-5. He had zone entries out the wazoo, right? This is a guy that can also generate his own shots and chances in the offense. So it's just, I liked what I saw there in the rookie season there. Unfortunately, it ended with an injury, but I just think the situation in Columbus, there appeared to be some room, right? Especially on the top power play. That's where I thought that Fantilli was going to eat potentially a top 6, even though they already had Monahan and Boone Jenner, but I just thought the team was going to lean on Fantilli. Little did they know that, Columbus would be the the NHL leader in goals scored at 5-on-5. What the hell? They also had the third best shooting percentage. So, yeah, crazy stuff. So, I mean, what were your thoughts on Fantilli going into the season, and where did you sort of see him, producing?
Well, a lot of players in that draft class, as we saw, like looking at Leo Carlson, looking at Connor Bedard, had a bit of a sophomore slump this year. Mm-hmm. And going into this year, I was definitely lowest on Fantilli of like those three guys, but he hadn't quite overachieved that much. So I felt like no matter what, it was going to be a jump for him. That was pretty much a no-brainer. And turns out he definitely did, right? He had 55-ish points, I think.
54 points in 82 games.
And 31 goals is pretty unbelievable. the crazy part that I found on my side of things, that he actually had a bit of a dip in the metrics that I tracked on the micro stat side of things, especially on the checking side. Everything else with a bit of a small drop, but the checking especially went down, which if you're looking strictly from a fantasy perspective, unless you're very highly valuing hits, that's not really the end of the world and not something to worry about a ton. What does interest me, though, is his finishing rate was outstandingly high this year.
Yeah.
However, it is Adam Fantilli. He could have the talent to sustain some of it and did show pretty high finishing the year before. It's just this year, man, it was up there. I do think that kind of to make it more sustainable, there should be a bigger focus on driving better offensive underlyings. I was talking to I try to get at least like a couple friends in each team's market just to check in and see if my intuitions are correct from looking at charts and to confirm stuff. So I was talking to my buddy Carter, who's a Columbus fan, grew up a Blue Jackets fan, and essentially came to the conclusion that he needs to be way more aggressive off the puck in the offensive zone. That is, I think, step number one for him. It would give himself way more chances just by getting open and really darting down open lanes, and will also pull opposing defenders kind of outside of their coverage to make his teammates a threat as well. So that just enhances your entire offensive impact overall.
Yep.
And by doing that, driving the net more, because his hands, this is another guy who in tight, his hands are unbelievable. His ability to finish really is what helped him a lot get to that 30 goal mark last year. And I think pairing all of that together would help him a very solid amount.
Yeah, no, I love that you brought up sort of that dip in the microstats because, he basically did hit as a sleeper, but he kind of did it in a roundabout way, right? Not in a way that was expected, So like you said, 54 points in 82 games, 32 goals, great, but massive efficiency, right? He had some excellent hits, right? 112 hits, so that's great for your Bangers League, but 4 power play points. What the? That's what was he doing there? That's crazy. I don't know. To me, it was just a surprise that Dean Evison was playing Fantilli line 3 and power play 2. That's kind of how he started the season, right? I didn't expect that. I didn't see that coming. Meanwhile, Monahan, Marchenko, Voronkov, Kent Johnson, these guys are all eating. They're all getting major run. And obviously, that Marchenko line was popping off with this efficiency, one of the best and most efficient lines in the league. So, yeah, when I look at Fantilli, gross start, like 21 points in the first 43 games. It wasn't until Monahan got injured where he got elevated up the lineup, and that's where he started to, the production was going, right? And that's kind of what I thought was going to happen, this 18 to 20 minute treatment. And he only got it when Monahan was injured. And then when Monahan came back, he was sort of relegated back down to line 2/line 3, power play 2, 16 minutes average time on ice. So it was a little bit frustrating, but he did hit, right? 54 points, that's pretty nice, especially with like one of your last picks. So I don't know. To me, I'm really interested in the player. I like what you said about kind of his off puck play. I thought that was really interesting. So yeah, this is a guy. I think the verdict here, dub. All right. We love the player, but I think we have to be a little bit wary of what Columbus did this season. They were so efficient, right? So I think a lot of people on this team are probably going to, come down just a little bit, right? Fantilli might be one of them, although, hopefully some of that off puck play sort of helps him run into a few more assists, and maybe he does get elevated up the lineup. So for me, what we can expect next season, I think, probably an improvement here, maybe another 55 points, maybe 60-point Fantilli. But again, it's going to definitely require him moving up the lineup and increasing his time on ice. All right, let's carry on. We got to get the biz here. All right. Third player we want to talk about, Big Marty Necas. Oh, yeah. I love it. I'm not going to talk too long on Marty Necas because I've taken many victory laps on this man. And I'll take many more. All right. Because I don't care. But this is a guy that obviously my thought process going into this extremely talented player, obviously. And I thought there was a really good chance that he would get more time on ice with Rod Brindamore, right? They moved some pieces out. Jake Gensel was gone. So to me, it made good sense that Necas was going to get a bunch more power play time. And he did, right? That was great. Also, this guy just in general, like with the metrics, he's an insane play driver and rush player. Elite, one of the best in the league. So I think, the line mates, that was one of the concerns that Nate had, is his potential line mates going into the year, but that didn't matter that much to me, in terms of predicting a little bit of a bounce back there, because when you have a guy like this, like, he can really drive his own offense. He's driving the motorcycle. The line mates are in the sidecar with the propeller helmet, right? And also, his numbers were actually better last year in 23-24 at 5-on-5 and on the power play. But he just wasn't getting the deployment. So I think that, I expected more deployment from him, and he got it, and he popped the hell off. So let's look at what he actually did here. And for those of you watching on YouTube, I did lose Louis here. I'm sure he's trying to get back on the stream here, but I'll just keep yammering on because I do that. Okay. So let's look at what Marty Necas was actually able to do. Big time season for him. 84 points in 79 games. Looked like a league winner right off the hop here. It was nuts. This guy had 37 points in the first 22 games. Sheesh. That's insane, right? Including 17 power play points. Right. I mean, that's more power play points than he had the entire year in 23-24. That's crazy. That's absolutely insane. So that's where I saw the bulk of his positive regression coming, and he did it in spades. Right. This is a guy that I'm always going to be in on just due to the talent. Right. In terms of the individual scoring and chance metrics, like, it just wasn't there, right? But that's not what this guy's for. On the year, he was 115th overall in shots on goal per 60. He was 71st overall in chuck and pucks per 60. And then, that's Fantilli. Sorry, he was 90th overall in individual Corsi for, and then 166th overall in individual scoring chances for per 60. So he's not that type of player. He's more of a play driver. And then obviously when he got traded to Colorado, it was crazy time. All right. Louis, I'd love to get your take on Marty Necas. What did you think about Necas going into the year? And like, this is one of those things with us here at Apples and Ginos. We are taking victory laps because this is a guy we called, in fairness, it was a 69-point season is what I projected it for, and he smashed that. So I didn't call him popping off the way he did. But what were your thoughts on Necas as a player going into the season, and what are your thoughts on him now?
So I've loved Necas. Watching him is just an absolute treat. He's an absolute dog. Like, for how short his career is, the amount of like clutch goals and OT winners in the regular season that he has is unbelievable. However, I can't fully take the dub on this despite drafting Necas, because my moronic past self dropped him a week and a half into the year.
Oh no.
So but listen, I dropped him for Brian Rust, who I think if we have time later to talk about my own sleepers, he's always in there. In the end, ended up working out. Rust was a huge part of me winning my championship week, but my God, that Necas drop made me feel some crazy level of pain I hadn't felt in fantasy before. Yeah. it was a little tough, but he's a phenomenal player. Part of the biggest storyline of the season with the Rantanen deal, obviously. But I think there's a lot of stuff for Necas that kind of developed even just going back to last season. And it started all the way back then. And I know he had, I have to check, but his pace was around 71 points in 22-23. And then it took a bit of a drop down to like mid-50s the year after. But looking at the data I have on him, his on-ice like offensive impact, his offensive generation improved. His ability to create off the rush and generate entries improved. His passing ability and ability to create chances for teammates improved. The only thing that kind of stagnated or stayed the same was his shooting prowess. And then that started really materializing itself at the start of this year as he kept getting better at those and kept really just blossoming into a star, really, aside from instead of playing kind of second fiddle to the top guns on Carolina. And I do think he's kind of one of the best offensive partners that a line mate can ask for. Mm-hmm. His team play category in my main cards are like completely maxed out. Everything you're talking about, from teammate utilization to how important he is there. And looking at the chart we have up here for the video watchers, he's usually been a very influent player. And so when he's on the ice, he kind of commands how the offense goes. But after that move to Colorado, he kind of turned into a bit more of a, I don't want to say support role, because that comes with a connotation that he might not be like, the main big piece. But he kind of did, he was on a line with McKinnon, and given how integral Nate Mack's presence is there, he kind of turned to the guy that really ensured that passes and options are always open and can always progress towards shots. And that allowed him to kind of cement himself as the number 2 there. And I'm really interested to see kind of how that works moving forward next year, because I'm assuming, actually, I don't know. We don't know who the third guy could be on that. Like, could be Landeskog, could be Lehkonen, could be Tuch. We'll see.
Yeah. And also, I mean, Nate just did towards the end of the season, they had him away from McKinnon, which wasn't amazing for fantasy. Like, they had him, I think, playing with, they had him with Lehkonen and McKinnon here in the last game and they're in the playoffs, but they had him with Brock Nelson as well and the Chushkin. They were kind of doing things like that. But I mean, this guy is just, he's an amazing facilitator and a rush player. And these guys are players that I want to be in on. He's an amazing power play performer as well. And that's really where I saw the numbers going up. And that obviously came to fruition. This guy popped for 37 power play points. I think that's 4th in the league. Like that's pretty damn good. So yeah, I mean, that said, this guy's value is nuked for next season. I don't think his ADP at the start of the season was 123. Marty Necas. What the hell? I had him on 6 of my teams. 6 of my 11 teams. I had Marty Necas. Yeah. So it was amazing. I loved it, especially at the start. I was just loving life. And yeah, he cooled off a bit. I think, what we saw this past season, like 84 points in 79 games, that's probably, I mean, I don't know. I think he maybe has 90 points in him here, but I also think it's probably more likely that he's like a 75 to 85 point player moving forward.
I think so too.
Yeah. So, but I mean, I love what I saw. And there, it's worth mentioning, there's been some rumblings, like maybe he's not happy in Colorado, for whatever reason.
I have seen that.
So, I mean, kick on over to Vancouver here, my man, like Marty Necas in Vancouver. I would love that. Although I will say, one of the knocks on Necas is the defensive play, right? He's known to make some boneheaded plays out there, giveaways and things like that. So you kind of take the good with the bad, but the good is elite good, and that's his sort of offense and chance generation for his teammates. So shout out to Marty Necas, you're a legend. Verdict, massive dub. I'm never gonna let anybody forget. Let's move on.
My friends didn't let me forget this season.
Yeah, but
they hounded me for that.
But you won. Did you say you won?
Yeah. So, and in the end,
buddy.
But during the season, I took some flack, seriously.
Yeah, well, you know what? You took the dub, and that's all that matters. All right, buddy, we got to move on. We got to talk about Louis' favorite player, Dylan Guenther. Oh, buddy, he's awesome. Yeah, this is, again, a player that we were really high on here at A&G. ADP was 160. And I mean, the thought process is pretty simple. Like, this guy's insanely talented. He walked onto the top power play unit in his first season, right? And I think he was being underrated here this year because he only played like 40 some odd games, right? So I think he was going under the radar, but he was already nearing like something we like to look at as far as natural stat trick and shots on goal per 60 and individual scoring chances for per 60. Louis is kind of around 10. If they're able to do that at 5-on-5, that's kind of a player that we consider, he's pretty elite at, generating shots and chances for himself. And this guy was approaching both those numbers at 5-on-5 in his first year, right? So that was really getting us kind of juiced on this player. And he was also expected to play with another really exciting player, Logan Cooley, who we will talk about in a little bit. But I just expected both these players to have a bigger role, more time on ice. And yeah, it looked pretty good. I mean, talk to me about Dylan Guenther and what you liked about the player going into the season, Louis.
Yeah, he was a guy that I picked up the year prior towards the end of the season because his game average fantasy points was unreal. Like, for a guy that was still on the market, it's like, how is this player like performing this well and still available in leagues? And it's not like he was a bit of a nobody prospect. He was picked 11th overall, I believe, in 2021. Or no, 9th, right before my Senators picked Tyler Boucher. That's how I remember. And yeah, so he was a guy that I've had my eye on for a while. He's also a bit of a dog. He's got that game-winning goal for Canada at the World Juniors a few years ago.
Yep.
Just general knack for coming up clutch. And he is the guy that I was going to the draft as if there's any like non-superstar that I need on my team going to the year, it's Dylan Guenther. Like, if anybody's ever watched the movie Draft Day, from probably over 10 years old now, but there's this scene where after they pick, I think it's Vontae Mack in it, this fictional football player, the GM comes out with like a little piece of paper that says Vontae Mack, no matter what, no matter where they were picking, that's who they were picking. So going into that was essentially my plan. I just essentially photoshopped the picture of Dylan Guenther on there, going Dylan Guenther, no matter what. This is who I'm picking, and I got him. I think I actually closed out my draft with like 3 Utah players. I went on a Utah stretch at that point. But Guenther was easily the best performing of the bunch. Yep. He was my guy going into the year. Unbelievably talented dual threat offensive player. Like, we look at his comparables too, it's pretty unreal. He's only 22, might be 23 now, I'm not sure. But looking at how his profile compares to guys like DeBrincat, Pasternak, Panarin, and they profile very similarly. They're already Guenther is already one of the best shooting options in the league, in my opinion. Despite only getting 27 goals last year, you just look at how this guy can rip it with almost like nonchalance. The way he just moves his wrist and gets off a shot in super quick fashion without needing much space or time is really something. Like, damn, if I'm a young player and I'm looking at improving my offensive game, this is a guy that I'm taking notes from for sure. And I'm really looking forward to see how his goal totals explode next year, because I'm fully expecting his development has been on the rise. Looking at the jump from obviously the year before, he only played 40 or so games. The year before that, he was, the metrics I had on him weren't really promising, but it was a small rookie season, and it's nonstop improvement for the kid, and I can't wait to see what the next step is.
Yeah, we're right there with you, man. That makes a lot of sense if you won your league and you picked up a bunch of Utah players late, because Utah is a club. These guys were 4th overall in the league and expected goals for at 5-on-5. Utah, what?
They got some smart guys there. I actually, around that time, I was presenting to their hockey analytics and hockey ops staff for the Utah Summer Hockey Analytics Challenge last year, and they got some smart people there and some really good team, and it's not surprising to me given how their trajectory is looking like, especially offensively.
Are you talking about people behind the scenes, like analytics people, sort of judging players and kind of getting them in? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Makes sense to me. I mean, this team was a smash this year, and we were excited in October about the team. We had a show that we sort of review our projections, and both Nate and I were just so excited about Utah, and it felt weird. We're like, are we really excited about Utah? And like, yeah, I think so. And it obviously hit. Like, these guys were amazing, but yeah, with Dylan Guenther, like 60 points in 70 games, that's awesome. 29 power play points. That is really, like, this guy is going to be a monster on the power play, I think, for his career. Like, obviously with that shot you mentioned, like you said, nonchalance, a great word for it. I remember a couple overtime goals. I think they were early on in the season. It's just like on his stick, off his stick, like he's barely moving. And this guy can really rip it. So that's not going anywhere. And I think that there's still some meat on the bone here with Dylan Guenther. Like, his time on ice, he only averaged 17 minutes time on ice for the year. And I thought that it was going to be closer to like 18 and a half, maybe 19. I thought this was a player they were going to feature, and they did offensively, but he was kind of a specialist in that way. But what was interesting too, he was injured for a little bit, and then he came back, and they started playing him 20 minutes. There was like a 10-game stretch there where they were playing him like 20 minutes. I'm like, yes, because I had him on 2 squads as well. I'm like, this is what we've been waiting for. And then, that kind of went back down to normal. But if this is a guy they're going to prioritize and play 18 to 20 minutes, like, we could be looking at a point per game player as soon as next season. So, yeah, I'm very excited about the player. Verdict here, massive dub. All right. Touch more time on ice. I think this could have been like a really big smash, right? For now, still 70 point pace. Love that. This guy's just warming up. All right, let's move on. We got to talk about Alex Tuch. All right. The most boring player for fantasy that you can possibly have. Old faithful, I like to call him, but damn, this guy had a great season. I mean, Tuch and the Sabres had a rough year in 23-24. Obviously, we had to pump the brakes on some excitement there for the team. I remember it was Buffalo and New Jersey. We're like, these two teams are going to be amazing. They're going to be fantasy gold mines. And, obviously things didn't exactly work out that way, but Tuch himself did have a pretty good year. His poor metrics, he had poor metrics in 23-24. That seemed like an outlier to me in terms of individual shot and chance generation. He was off of his historic numbers, so I thought there was some positive regression coming, right? And his ADP was 116, so it didn't make any sense to me. I also thought that he was
way too low.
Yeah, it just didn't make
Yeah.
sense. And I thought that he was a lock for some more power play time on ice. Even though he's not a big time producer there, I thought that he'd run into a few more points. And like I said, ADP 116 didn't make sense for a guy that could potentially get 70 points. So, I mean, what were your thoughts about Tuch and even the Sabres going into the season? Did you think a bounce back was possible?
It felt like, I mean, listen, looking at the Sabres, it's hard to predict positive stuff on their end team-wise for the
So
last 10
sad over
years.
there. Oh my gosh.
I mean, listen, if it means an extra spot in the Atlantic for a playoff spot in my Senators, I can't really complain.
Yeah, let the tank continue.
Yeah, exactly. But no, Tuch, yeah, as you said, he's old reliable fantasy-wise.
Mhm.
Like, he's a very unique player in that he's everything that he does well is specifically tailored for fantasy, it feels, and everything he doesn't do well doesn't really show up on a fantasy sheet. Like, he's a little under average defensively in some certain metrics that are a little lower. Again, don't really impact that. But he's another guy that's really clutch. So if you're looking at, getting game-winning goals as extra boosts, that's going to help for sure. And talk about clutch, he was super clutch this year in fantasy. Like, he had unreal final weeks in the season for those who have playoffs around that time. And just very consistent, I find, in my opinion. Like, he's a player that I've tried to acquire a lot in fantasy leagues just because nobody seems to talk about him.
Yeah.
And he consistently, year after year, puts up very good numbers. And even just within the season, like what we're looking at right now is the consistency spread. And he didn't have a single performance that would classify in the bottom third of the league within the manually tracked sample that Corey had, which is unreal to think of for a player that, plays as much and is relied on as much. And even in the large majority were top half of the league performances, a handful that were still classified as elite. And I do think he might, like, I feel like it's pretty obvious to say this, but any player could potentially do better outside of Buffalo. But I think specifically him could really benefit from that. I know there's rumors of him maybe being traded, but he's like a phenomenal net front player, easily Buffalo's best option. But that gets really muted by Buffalo's poor cycle play and power play, as you mentioned, right? Like, the power play production wasn't really clicking, but I don't think that's really an issue on his end. That's a whole team-wide thing.
Yeah. And
I do wonder, though, like, speaking of potential improvements, the one thing that I found in my data on the team level for Buffalo that really has at least somewhat steadily increased year over year is their ability to generate pressure in the offensive zone and really get chances and time and establish that. Everything else is kind of, for the math nerds out there, like, sinusoidally varied a little bit.
Sinusoidally, I love that. I know what you mean.
Listen, yeah, anytime I could add in words that I would only hear in my second or third year university math courses, I will. Legend. But yeah, so listen, it's a player that no matter kind of what happens next year, I do think he's due for maybe even an extra little bump. Mm-hmm. But he's a guy you can always rely on, and I think that's probably a win in terms of a sleeper pick from you guys in prediction on that front.
Yeah, no, I think it felt pretty good. I mean, again, all said and done, this guy had 67 points in 82 games after 59 the season previous, right? So that's good. And he got there. But again, similar to Fantilli, it wasn't really the way we drew it up. You know what I mean? Like, the shots didn't come back, right? The individual shot production didn't come back for Tuch, but the efficiency did, right? Power play time didn't come back, right? But the efficiency did. And also, like, the Sabres as a team, they were second best in the league in shooting percentage at 5-on-5. What? That was surprising to me, actually, because they weren't really generating a ton, at least according to, like, natural stat trick. Their scoring chances for generation wasn't that high, but the efficiency was, right? The problem was everything else was hot garbage. Okay. Like,
a lot of it was zone time driven offensively for them, in my opinion. Even though they weren't able to get a lot of chances, the volume was good enough that paired with the zone time, it helped him to kind of give him a chance on the efficiency side, and he completely took that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the whole team did, it looks like to me. But I mean, this team was 6th worst in expected goals for percentage. Like, that's pretty bad. When you're hanging with San Jose and Anaheim and Chicago, like, that show ain't no good. All right, Buffalo, what's going on? Actually, as an aside, I just heard Tage Thompson on the Strick and Cam podcast or whatever. Have you heard this podcast? It's like Andy Strick.
I know the one you're talking about. I don't listen to it, but yeah.
Yeah, it was so sad. Like, the way Tage was talking about Buffalo, like, he's a current member of the team, and it was just, it just didn't sound good. It was like the whole podcast panel and Tage was just like, yeah, Buffalo sucks. Like it was like that kind of vibe. So dang, I mean,
That's a guy who just scored the golden goal at the World Championships
I
for his
know.
country, and he
Well,
comes back and is like, "Oh right,
I know.
this is
He's
the team I
yeah,
play for."
yeah. Like just talking about Buffalo, like he was saying how crappy like where he had initially lived in Buffalo was, and like he moved to this little suburb and it's a little bit better, but it was just like I don't know. If you're like a Buffalo fan and you're listening to Tage talk about the team, it's like this is yeah, I wonder why we're not doing so well. But anyways, shout out to the Sabres. There are brothers in expansion over here in Vancouver, and neither one of us have won a damn thing. All right, and that stinks. But yeah, in terms of Tuch, like you said, Old Faithful, this guy was a beast. His periffs were insane. This guy led the league in blocks by a forward with 113. Buddy, I mean,
I didn't know that. Damn,
yeah,
that's crazy.
he led the league. He does that, and he had 86 last year. So this is in his bag for sure. So he's a guy I would expect now to be a high shot blocking forward. But yeah, Tuch's going into a contract year. We'll see what the Sabres want to do with him. But I think he's a glue guy, a player that you don't want to lose, right? A player you need, especially in Buffalo, if you're going to try and get out of the basement. So verdict, I think we're taking a small dub there. He had a point per game pace, or same pace that he had last season. But, that was based off efficiency, and it's not really something I like relying on for fantasy, but I also think the Sabres are going to be better next season. So there you go. Shout out to Alex Tuch. We got to move forward. We got to talk about another Utah hockey club, or Utah Mammoth now, Logan Cooley. All right. Did you have Logan Cooley, Louis, as well?
I didn't. The guys I picked it was Guenther, unfortunately Dursey, who got injured. Like
I had Dursey too in a lot of
early on.
spots.
He lived on my IR all year. And then Connor Ingram, who was pretty solid early on, and then I dropped him somebody dropped Aiden Hill, and I picked him up right away. Yeah, my goalies were doing well even without him. It was Guenther ended up being the only survivor in the end, but yeah, I didn't have Cooley.
Yeah. Well, obviously, as Guenther went, I think Cooley went. These guys played together for a large portion of the year. This guy's ADP was in the 160s as well, right next to Guenther. And our thought process here, we're trusting the talent of the player and the potential for increase in responsibility, increase in opportunity, right? Increased role with a up-and-coming good young team. And a lot of the same reasons I liked Guenther, that's why I liked Cooley. So one of the things that separates Cooley, though, for me from Guenther is his ability to facilitate. Obviously, this guy is an amazing passer, like chance assists, high danger assists. This guy's off the charts with that. He's one of the best in the league, actually. And I just thought, we're banking on Guenther to have a good season. He's going to be playing with Cooley. I thought Cooley was going to be good as well. And I thought power play 1 would be Cooley's as well. And that didn't really materialize. They seem to like Barrett Hayton out there instead of Cooley. And that was right up to the end of the year, which was a little bit frustrating. I think, again, some more meat on the bone there. Logan Cooley was able to get 20 power play points, but 50% power play share. I'd like to see that up around like 65% power play share. Now we're looking at 29 power play points with Logan Cooley, the same way Dylan Guenther did. So talk to me about Cooley. Is this a player you were in on? Did you see him kind of popping off? Like he had 65 points in 75 games.
Yeah, having followed him since his draft, is definitely a player I've looked at as a potential. I know you like Barzal a lot too from listening to an episode or two. So I've always kind of been apprehensive on, is he going to be more on the Barzal side where he's like one of the league's best puck movers and the production is fine, or does he take that next step and becomes like a legitimate year after year point per game thing? And based on what we saw last year, I think you could argue that the latter is coming in rather quickly for sure. The power play production will definitely help. I understand using Hayton as a net front guy because he's unreal there. Mm-hmm. But yeah, next year, Cooley needs to be on that first unit 100%. Having him and Keller there as dual playmakers with Guenther as the trigger man and someone else in front would be really good to continue his production jumps. But looking at the dashboard we have in front here, these are the multi-year cards. This is essentially the main tool, I would say, because it's definitely the most data rich in terms of all the different data points that are there. And we look at all the strengths, all the bar charts that are jutting out the most, all puck movement related. Yeah. You're looking at teammate utilization, playmaking ability, passing entries, ability to create off the rush, carries into the zone, all of that, and even finishing ability, which is something you really like to see from someone who's a bit more of a playmaker. But that means, hey, as long as he's getting just enough chances, he'll be able to keep up on the goal side of things. And I really like him as a partner to Guenther, both around the same age. Another guy who's got really good comparables, like Guenther. We got Bedard, Kyrou, and Kucherov as his three most that is his three closest stylistic comparables. And when you combine all that dynamic talent with, honestly, in my opinion, better than expected peripherals, like his hit volume was above bottom quarter, which for a player who's so finesse driven, you take that for sure.
He's not going to hurt you.
His shot volume was still good enough, thanks to being able to kind of get open off puck. So it's definitely a player that I'm looking at next season, and I'm not telling my friends that I'm looking at him, but I'm looking at him because I want to be able to steal him late for sure.
Yeah, I think he might be available even a little bit later than he probably should be, just because he wasn't getting that power play one, right? Like maybe people will look at that. But I mean, this is a guy that got 20 power play points with only a 50% power play share, like I said. So, all he needs is a few more seconds, 20 more seconds, 30 more seconds on the power play, and we're looking at more production. So, yeah, I think this is obviously a player that I'm really high on. 65 points, 75 games. Love that. He's an amazing rush player and skater as well. So I think the verdict here, it's a dub. We're taking the dub. I think at this value, you have to be happy with the performance he got. And I think there were times in the season with Logan Cooley where it seemed like he may go off even more. Like he was getting the 20-minute treatment, which is a little bit different than what Guenther was able to do. It was like, I felt like they trusted Logan Cooley a little bit more. And when you see a guy getting 20 minutes pretty consistently for parts of the season, he has the coach's confidence. So, question for me. The only thing is he going to get full power play one next year? And I think the answer to that is yes. All right. A resounding yes, 1,000 times yes. Make it happen. All right. We don't toot around here. We got to get Logan Cooley out on the power play. Let's move on to the next player. Oh God, it's Matty Beniers. This is one of mine, Louis. I was excited about Matty Beniers. I thought there was a bounce back. His ADP was 170. So I'll give you my thought process here. Obviously, I thought Beniers was the new coaching change. I thought was really going to benefit Beniers. I thought that Dan Bylsma was going to go to more of a kind of a top heavy, top two line heavy deployment scheme, and also a top power play. And neither of those happened. And shame on me. It's like, they actually, the Kraken just traded for Mason Marchment as well. And I saw a couple tweets out there just like, yeah, we got another, middle six winger. Like, all right, they basically have 4 second/third lines on the team. They don't have any stars, and that's important, right? But I did think that Matty Beniers was due for positive regression, right? He didn't have a great year. I also thought that he was going to be sort of stapled to Jared McCann, who is another player that Nate and I were really high on going into the season. He's a big time shooter. Yeah. I thought there was going to be an increase in deployment there, more time on ice, more power play time on ice. And, one thing I was really looking at last season that was sort of driving a lot of my thought process is transition play, right? Zone entries leading to chances. That's what I was really focusing on last year. And I've altered that a little bit, but one thing I liked about Matty Beniers, he touches the puck a lot, right? He's a big time. He's always got the puck. And I like guys like that for fantasy. I think that's important. He also secured the bag, right? Signed a big contract with term there with the team. So I just thought there was a good chance that he bounced back. What were your thoughts on Matty Beniers and I don't know, his ability to maybe bounce back after a 37-point season in 23-24?
So we mentioned Barzal before. This is the more extreme case, I think, in my opinion here. He is a guy that Beniers is so fascinating to me because when I first started coding all the metrics for LB Hockey, he was breaking my scales on the defensive zone retrieval side of things to a point where, I don't even know the best way to explain this, but just know, he was an unbelievable outlier to the point where in his first season, he was, involved defensively on retrievals more so than double second place amongst forwards in the league. It was insane to the point where I thought there was a recording error, and then it kept happening year over year.
Yeah.
So you couple that with how good he is at managing the puck when as a carrier, which is very rare for guys like that. You look at guys like Tim Stützle or other players like Mark Scheifele in that mold where they're highly they might not have the best defensive numbers. Those guys, Beniers does, but they're very involved defensively and they're really strong in the breakout, but their puck management gets them to kind of turn it over a lot.
Yep.
This is where Beniers differs, that he really doesn't. He gets it out cleanly with possession a lot, and he gets involved a lot, doesn't turn it over. The problem is that doesn't really help you in
Yeah.
fantasy at all. As exciting as it is to watch, doesn't really help you that much. So I have been a believer in him. I drafted him not this year, but the year before, and was able to kind of swindle my way into getting Svechnikov for him,
Nice.
which helped me a lot. But yeah, I'm unsure about Beniers. Like his checking game and shooting volume have regressed a fair bit since 2022-23. His deployment, although he's getting the ice time, his low favorable zone start share, his average quality of teammates, and a high quality of competition kind of turns it into maybe not a matchup player, but definitely if you have two lines rolling, he's the one that's going to be going up and getting some of the tougher minutes, even though if it's still a good share of minutes. It's just the production seems to be so highly dependent, which makes sense given how much he's involved on the breakout. You'd kind of expect him to do the work up and then rely on his teammates to finish or complete those plays and those transition plays that he sets up. But aside from McCann, which I'd have to check to see how much he actually played with him.
Yeah, it wasn't his main line. He ended up playing more with Jaden Schwartz and Capo Caco than he did with McCann.
Yeah, and when after that, most of the best goal scorers on the team are defensemen like Dunn or Montour. That really doesn't gel with his style of game in terms of racking up points. I still love him as a player, as a fantasy option. I'm very skeptical moving forward. Like the fact that Shane Wright ended up being the better sleeper of the two is pretty. Like I think Wright had a stretch of 41 games where he was on pace for like a full 70 points in a complete season, which is insane to think about. So listen, if Wright can get that development, maybe there's a chance that Beniers does too. And with the changes in Seattle, who knows? But he's definitely a guy that I'm way higher on in real life, impact wise, rather than fantasy.
Yep. No, I think you're bang on there. I actually didn't realize Shane Wright got more points than Matty Beniers. What the hell? He got one more point than Matty Beniers? Jeez. Yep. I mean, Matty Beniers, 43 points in 82 games. So was valuable at times during the season, right? I found they had a good schedule a lot. So I ended up like picking up Beniers for the week, and then he would do nothing, and then I just bounce him back to the waiver wire. But yeah, like you said, still a player of interest for me, but I'm not sold that he's ever going to be a big offensive contributor unless Seattle picks up kind of a game-breaking player and Beniers gets access to him. I think, they need a really big winger, like a Martin Necas or something like that, like a guy, a dynamic player. You see what happened in Dallas there when they get a guy like Mikko Rantanen. I think that Seattle needs something like that. Not obviously, not Mikko Rantanen, but a player like that, a dynamic offensive force, because they just don't have it here in Seattle. I mean, McCann was supposed to be that for Beniers, a big time shooter, but I don't know. It didn't really happen there. So verdict on Matty Beniers, we're taking an L. All right. He didn't do what I hoped he would do, and it just wasn't there for the crack in the season. Like you said, Beniers played amazing defensively, but for fantasy, that doesn't mean a hill of beans. All right. We don't care. So yeah, this is also going to be a tough projection next season with the new head coach in there. I don't know. I'm probably staying away from Beniers until I see what's what. Leave him on the wire, and then, maybe pick him up if he starts popping off. All right, let's move on. We got to talk about from the Winnipeg Jets, Gabriel Vilardi. It's a Vilardi party. Oh yeah. The Jets were a wagon this year. It was crazy, and Vilardi was a big part of that. Part of our thought process here. This guy's a sleeper. It was quite simply, this guy was ADP 166. He was projected to be line one, power play one. That alone makes him a sleeper for me. Like there was really no one coming for those minutes. And to top that off, this guy's very efficient. Like he's a very efficient player, and he has been throughout his career. I mean, in 23-24, he had almost a 19% shooting percentage, 22-23, 19% shooting percentage. This is a guy that puts the biscuit in the basket pretty darn well. He's also a great forechecker, right? Which I thought would be really helpful if he's playing with a guy like Kyle Connor, who I also expected to have a big bounce back because he wasn't very good the year previous. And I just think Vilardi is very much a guy at the end of passes, but he's not really a play driver, right? But that didn't really matter at this ADP. It was a great risk to take for me, and I got him in a spot. Like I said, I think the opportunity and deployment alone was enough for me to be interested. But what are your thoughts on Vilardi?
Vilardi is interesting, and I always like to keep it. The Jets I've always kind of considered as my second team because like both my parents and I are from Winnipeg, and I still have a lot of family there. So I keep up with them a good bit. And even then, Vilardi is one of the first players when I started really paying attention to drafts and stuff that I was like, oh, this guy could really be something, despite the fact that he had started to slip down boards a little bit relative to where he was expected before. came off a couple really tough injuries after he got drafted to his back, which like those are some of the worst you can get in terms of hindering your movement and just general development. But he pushed through. I really liked the promise he was showing in LA, and then when he got traded to Winnipeg, I was super happy. But he's weird in a good way, I think, as a player. Very unique. He's had really big swings on the shutdown side of thing. Like his defense took a big drop 2 years ago once he first joined Winnipeg, and I figured that was a systems thing, and it did pop back up a little bit. But when you're playing with Connor and Scheifele, that line is always going to be all offense, no defense, no matter what you're doing. The Lowry line is there for defense, don't worry.
Yep.
And then his checking game took a bit of a fall off last year, but he still remained a really good disruptor and reliable exit man, which again helps with the dynamic play of Scheifele and Connor. But his offense has somewhat stabilized a little bit. Like we look at the progression tracker over here that Blake is sharing for him, and he's pretty much like a 75th percentile power forward in terms of his ability to generate and his overall shooting game. And what makes Vilardi is he is one of the best net front power play specialists in the game. Like I said, he's not a driver. He's very much gets a lot of his value from being off puck. And that comes from his incredible sense and anticipation, along with another guy, again, who's got really good hands and tight. And I think with how his game is, that's just going to drive a lot of inconsistency. That's actually kind of what shooed me away from picking him up over the last couple of years, is that he will go weeks without getting, above 2 fantasy points in a single game. And then he'll put in like a 20-point night, like in a game or two back to back. And I've always kind of been one to kind of favor more consistent players with how I build my team. But he's a little bit in the perfect spot with how his game is built in those inconsistencies, because you've got a very strong power play team in Winnipeg. The way he's able to draw penalties and the line mates he has, and just Winnipeg's overall strength on the power play really makes so he can leverage his strength as much as possible and maximize returns despite the inconsistency that his game comes with.
Man, I can listen to you talk about players all day long, buddy. I'm loving this. This is great analysis. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I agree with all you're saying there. I also think, with Vilardi too, like in terms of what we can expect next year, it might be a little bit of a downturn, right? Like he shot almost 21%, right? He's shown to be efficient, so that's not out of the question, but I think that drops a little bit. And then the on-ice shooting percentage as well. Like, at all strengths, his on-ice shooting percentage was 15.1, right? We obviously know what kind of year Winnipeg had. They were just on fire. That line in particular was great. So I think that drops off a little bit, but like you said, this guy's power play performance, amazing. And there might be a little bit of runway there for him to get even more. Like he only got 25 power play points, which is great. But this guy, he could be a 30 power play point guy, right? I think there might be a little bit of chance for him to do that, if they kind of continue the way they, line up and direct that power play. So yeah, it's a player that I'm still going to be interested in, but that value is probably nuked as well, just based on what he was able to do and what Winnipeg was able to do. Verdict on Gabriel Vilardi? Big time dub. Oh yeah, we're taking a win there. Like I said, Winnipeg was a wagon. Vilardi was in the sidecar, had the propeller helmet. Okay, he was just along for the ride, but we like that. We got Nick Ehlers potentially leaving town, so I think should help Vilardi, secure his role a little bit. I also think it's going to be, helpful for a guy like Cole Perfetti. But yeah, I think 60 points is probably where I'm going to land on Vilardi next year with room for more. I don't know. We're going to have to dig into projections there, but what do you think he can do next season points wise?
Yeah, I'm thinking around, like as you said, 60, 65. That's probably in the right range. I do think Winnipeg is going to come back down to earth a little bit, so I actually don't think his power play production is going to increase that much, if at all, just because of how efficient it was this year, and I don't know if it can kind of keep that level.
Yep.
But yeah, I'd say 60 points is probably good. So funny story about Vilardi. There's a guy in my league that picked him up early, and he ended up having, I think, almost all of the Jets players. Like he had Connor, he had Scheifele, Morrissey, Vilardi, and maybe even Neil Pionk as well. The guy was absolutely loaded on those on that team, which meant he was hounding after me for Hellebuck real bad. But one of the better decisions, maybe not selling on that. But yes, Vilardi is 100% a big piece, and next year we should expect similar-ish, if not a little bit of a drop in production.
Absolutely, buddy. All right, we got two more sleepers, but we're going to kind of fly through those because they were deep sleepers, because I want to get to your sleepers, Louis, so you can, I'd be remiss if I didn't get you to tell us who your favorite sleepers are. So let's quickly go through. We had Michael Bunting here, the bunt cake, Louis' favorite player. He's talking all kinds of yang on Michael Bunting, and I'm here for it. Yeah, obviously that didn't work out with Michael Bunting. I thought that, he would kind of continue on his power play one run that he had with Pittsburgh, and that didn't materialize. Then he ended up getting traded to Nashville, where maybe his value was a little bit higher. So still, I don't see Michael Bunting as really a player of interest. But before we move on from Bunting, talk to me about this viz that we're looking at here, Louis. And get on over to YouTube if you want to see something awesome.
These are the aptly named Pokemon cards. Another thing I've always really liked growing up are the Pokemon games and all that. So I didn't have much analysis to give on Michael Bunting, given that he's my favorite player, and I don't have anything to say.
That's
about
a given. Yeah,
perfect.
Yep.
But I found it funny that he was his most similar Pokemon was essentially a middle stage evolution that had promise but never quite fully evolved. And I thought, given your pick of him as a deep sleeper, was kind of appropriate.
That's awesome. My son would love this, by the way. Yeah, he's obsessed with Pokemon. I got to show him your Pokemon cards. This is epic stuff. Shout out to Michael Bunting. Thanks for nothing, good sir. All right, we're kicking you back to waivers, and that's fine. Let's move on to Marco Rossi, Marco Polo Rossi. All right, that's what we call him over here. Again, we're not going to go too deep here, but obviously this guy was a smash. He was 60 points for this guy. He was available way late. And our thought process here: top 6 deployment with Cap or Boldy. What's not to like? You know what I mean? Or the Zucchini Man, Matt Zuccarello, right? All right. And yeah, this guy has acumen. He's a high draft pick and was in line for some increased deployment. So any thoughts on Marco Rossi before we move on here?
Yeah, I've always been a fan. For those who could kind of see my camera, I have a Marco Rossi in the back behind me right now. Buddy. But always been a big fan of his. He actually lived in my neighborhood when he played for the 67s. Ran into him a few times. Great guy. Legs like tree trunks. Like the guy can just withstand contact like there's no tomorrow. And I really hope he stays in Minnesota at the center position. Bit of a cloudy future there because he's due a contract, which this is first sneak peek of the new LB Hockey contract projector that we're showing on screen. It hasn't been shown publicly anywhere else yet. I was working on it last night, and I figured I'd throw it in. But yeah, so projecting, honestly, is one of those players, could see a bridge deal, could see a long-term extension, depending on that. Cap's going to fluctuate. Currently projecting most likely at 17%, a $5.5-ish million deal. But if it goes full length, 8x8, could be in the cards as well. Really depends, I think, on what Minnesota does if they move him or not.
This is awesome, buddy. Yeah, check out YouTube. Check out what we're doing here because he's got the contract projector up here on LB Hockey. Really nice stuff, actually. This is just clean, man. Dang, you got some good sensibilities over here. But yeah, and he's coming to Vancouver. That's confirmed. Well, apparently they made an offer for him, and that Minnesota rejected it. So we'll see. Vancouver's in the mix. I would love if we picked up Marco Rossi. I think that's a player that would fit in really well here. But yeah, that's that. Before I let you go, we're getting a little long in the tooth, but Louis, give me some of your sleepers, some players that you're interested in moving into next year.
So I'll go with the guy I already kind of mentioned here. Some of them might be sleepers or guys that are generally underappreciated, but because we might not consider them sleepers, but I think just need more credit overall.
Yep.
I mentioned Brian Rust. He has always been a guy that I don't think I've ever drafted him ever, but he's always one of my first picks in off free agency within week 1 or 2. Always been a guy that I look at just because his shot volume's unreal. He's always getting placed next to Crosby at 5-on-5 on the power play, and if not, Gino's there. So that's a guy that I always look into. And hey, unreal performer in the last couple of weeks. Him and Pasternak won me my finals for sure with those 2-goal games and hat tricks for sure. And moving on to the next one, Quinton Byfield, another guy that has just seen constant progression and a player that I scouted a lot in the 2020 draft. He was on a mission later on in the season. I don't remember exactly the stretch he had, but he had these absolutely crazy goal scoring streak or just general stretch with around a goal per game for maybe 8 or 10 games at
11
some
goals
point.
in the last 21 games for him. So very nice.
Unreal. Yeah. And I picked him up, and of course, right as I do so, he gets injured. But I think next year he's definitely a guy to keep an eye on, especially with LA maybe being a little pissed that they keep losing to Edmonton, wanting to shake things up. But he's a guy that will be staying there no matter what, and we'll see elevated time. Maybe along Adrian Kempe is another mainstay on my teams. And lastly, at forward, this is a guy I need the Sens to trade for so bad because he's apparently available, and the connection with Timmy Stu would be unreal. It was a missed opportunity to not pick him at 32nd overall in 2020 when they could have. But JJ Peterka, what a player! Another guy who needs a deal. I'm just pulling up the contract projector here to see what it predicts for him on an 8-year deal, around $8 million. Most likely going to be around 3-4 years, maybe even 2, around 6.5. But this is a guy that, if he is as available as the insiders say he is, teams need to jump on because he has been unbelievable progression-wise over the last couple of years. What do we have left on D here? Okay, yes. So you mentioned, who was it? Seattle, that had a lot of off nights, right? In the sense, Anaheim is the team that always jumps to me on that side, and any fantasy player knows the Ducks always play on those Sunday nights or whatever, Friday. They always play on the nights where they have you always got some space on in your lineup. And Jackson Lacombe is a player I've loved watching. As much as I like Pavel Mintyukov and how he did the year before, he took a bit of a drop this year. Another 67s legend him. But Jackson Lacombe really took over. And he's a player that just contributed on all fronts. I think he ranked as like a top 30 defenseman in my model last year. I could verify that right now. 11th. Oh my God. Top 40 player league-wide. Really, really good. That's probably overrating him, but it just goes to show that the micro stats are crazy on the offensive and defensive side of things. It's only a matter of time before the production gets even better. And, okay, this guy, I need to pick every year. Mackenzie Weegar, depending on how much your league includes peripherals.
Oh, yeah. Banger league legend.
Yes, banger league legend. If I'm not able to get him in my draft, without fail, I'm trading for him in the first couple of weeks. And he's a mainstay on the team. Last year, not the year that just happened, but the year before, he was playing so well out of his mind that I was able to package him and Braden Point for Cale Makar in a dynasty league, and then just picked up Weegar right again the year after in the draft. He's a guy that I've always been a fan of just because of how good and efficient of a player he is, especially defensively to watch. But fantasy-wise, he hits, he blocks, he's a mainstay in Calgary's offense and how their passing routes are designed around him and Nazem Kadri as well, but Weegar especially on the back end. I'm excited to see how Zane Parekh gets involved into this. I don't want to include too many Calgary Flames because Dustin Wolf is my goalie pick. But Weegar and Parekh and how they might interact and how their defense is going to change is really something I'm keeping an eye on. And yeah, I mentioned Dustin Wolf. There might not be a goalie in a better spot on the come up to improve both internally and with no competition. Like, he will get all of the games this year. He's a player that I've always been very bullish on. Despite his size, he's always had unbelievable levels at every level that he's played, or unbelievable numbers at every level he's played at. And he's someone that I think I didn't have on my team most of the year last year because my goalies were already in such a good position. I kind of didn't need to go out and get him, but he was on my watch list, and I was always like, okay, if a goalie's getting injured, this is the guy I'm picking up. In fact, I might run 4 goalies if I get a forward or defenseman injury. That's how good he was playing. So he's another player I'm looking at. That's kind of the starting lineup of players I've devised for sleepers or underappreciated guys.
Louis sleepers. You heard it here first, folks. I love all of those. Like, JJ Peterka is obviously a guy. It's going to be interesting to see where he lands. And Jackson Lacombe is another guy that I'm so excited about. I can't wait to see his ADP because I still think that's a guy that is going to get slept on, right? And there's some variance there, right? We got a new coach. We don't know if Jackson Lacombe is going to get power play 1. You know, I see him kind of as like a Miro Heiskanen guy, maybe, you know, not the most offensive defenseman, but for real life, so valuable. Like, when I dug in on Jackson Lacombe, I found out he was one of the best, if not the best, in terms of generating offense and shots from the D zone. Like, and Anaheim in general, I think they were tops in the league at that. which is insane.
Anaheim is
And
such a
Anaheim,
funky team.
yeah,
They really are.
that they're number one in anything doesn't make any sense. But obviously,
Yeah.
you know, Jackson Lacombe had an amazing year, really came into his own. So that's a player I'm absolutely in on as well, buddy. That's all we got. That's it, buddy. I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for being here, Louis. Before I let you go, why don't you let our listeners know where they can find you on the socials and anything else you're working on that's coming up here for this next season?
Yeah, so I'm socials wise, I'm primarily on Blue Sky. You can find me at Louis Boulet, so which is my full name, .bsky.social. The LB Hockey account is there as well. Also on Twitter, but not nearly as often. Most of the time, you can find me on Blue Sky or Instagram as well at LB Hockey. I think it's LB.hockey_. I made it very recently. You know how getting Instagram handles are nowadays. Yeah. You can obviously check out the website at LB Hockey. So that's lb-hockey.com. And for those that are interested in hearing me yap more about hockey analytics, I just posted the video for the conference presentation I just did for the Linköping Hockey Analytics Conference in Sweden. So this one I recorded, I think it was a couple weeks ago, and posted on the LB Hockey YouTube account, which doesn't have any other content there, but I'm hoping to get some short form content out soon. So that video specifically around 10 minutes long and talks about my work in merging shot data to measure how important players are to their team's offensive flow and the roles in their team's passing system. So again, for the real hockey analytics nerds, it's out there. Feel free to check it out or not. But yeah, that's pretty much all I can think of plugging. Oh, and the Zoopcast. If you want another podcast, check it out. It's mostly Ottawa hockey focused, so a little bit of a niche there. But for those that are interested, feel free to check it out.
I love it, buddy. Great job over there at the Zoopcast. I listened to a couple episodes just to prepare for this. So yeah, you guys are doing some fine work over there. But I really appreciate you being here. I'll throw the link in the description here for that video that you made on YouTube. That's great stuff. I watched it, and I'm just scratching the surface at what you do. Seriously, I feel like tip of the iceberg, and I'm starting to understand and also seeing the benefits in fantasy for knowing some of these metrics here and understanding the microstats. So, and thanks for what you do. Thanks for being here. And thank you, listeners, for being here. Really appreciate you. We got some more content on the way. We're going to have a super time. It's the off season and we're not stopping. We go until the wheels fall off. All right. So anyways, we'll talk to you next time. Thanks so much for being here. Celebrate your day. Bye for now.